order to beat the US in their trade war, in order to survive the trade war. So even if in the US there will be more mass pollution, the result of Trump's continuing his campaign and not being reigned in by control in the House of Representatives, by maybe control in the Senate, by maybe actually beating him at some point, we are not capable of actually making any change on we are actually letting China and forcing China's hand here, meaning instead of caring about the environment and the pollution within their cities, they now don't have a choice. And they would have cared because the pollution in their cities is a problem for them. But if they don't have a choice, and that's where we're leaving them, then the biggest, most industrial places with the most factories, with the most ability to protect, with the least protections in terms of what is happening in pollution, will now pollute even more. So even if the United States will slightly pollute more, make significant harms, there will be much more significant harms worldwide if we, as the Democratic Party, don't make a change. Very proud to do.
Speaker for the remarks. Call upon the leader of opposition.
Yeah, no, this one's rubbish.
So panel, there are two major problems with the opening government's case. A is that they premise their entire case on the Democrats getting elected by doing this, right? And the second is a weird kind of burden shift in which they try to push the burden on us, in which we have to basically defend completely running only on green things. Note that their burden is to basically run unemployment issues at the significant expense of heavy environmental cost. What this necessarily translates to is that they try to appeal to basically shale gas frackers in the countryside in Alaska, for an example, that they basically mean deep sea drilling in front of America's coast, that they mean coal miners in the Rust Belt. Now the biggest problem for them is we've lost them already. The Democrats are not going to get those voters back. They'll need those voters from elsewhere. Esteemed panel, we're going to do a few things. We're actually going to go a little bit into why specifically going for environmentalism is in the mid to long term the best way for the Democratic Party to stay electable, to get turnout, and to get basically informed coalitions of voters that are on their side that right now are undecided often or lean towards Republicans. But before that, why have they lost them, right? Like, look, no thank you. Now the problem is specifically with these sort of disgruntlement is the host of different issues. We aren't the left, they've never been socially very much aligned with the left, but they've always stuck with the Democrats because unions were a big thing, right? They always stuck to the left because the left was the party of labor, etc. Guess what? Specifically in those areas that are more and more deindustrialized, they are no longer. Specifically in those areas where for now decades, specifically their social conservatism has been whipped up into a frenzy, and the cultural issues and clashes between left and right made their core fundamental interests. That is the point where we think we are not going to get them back, right? Now, in addition, why is that also going to basically be true? Specifically, the Republicans have locked down that demographic, right? They've locked down that demographic by, for decades, seeming more approachable, seeming closer, seeming folksier, seeming more actually tangible, right? Specifically, all those questions in terms of aloofness for the Democratic Party trying to appeal to tons of minorities, etc., beyond blue collar laborers haven't forgotten that. We need a very plausible mechanism for why we're going to get them back when we're promising them jobs that they deep down really know actually are lost, even though they're airing out their anger and their fury. Guess what? They're not very much hoping for those jobs necessarily back. They might want that, but largely right now, the social issues are the ones that dominate them. You're not getting them. Now, Why specifically is it so incredibly terrible at the point at which the Democratic Party is willing to basically pivot back? Specifically these kind of things like the Green New Deal. Guess what? This is like a first rough draft. Sure, it's a massive political debate, but specifically these kind of pivots right now are a great opportunity to tap into a potential of a large green movement, right? When they come up with a POI and basically say you had a groundswell in terms of people that were relatively centrist to the very left, uniting, fighting for green parties because they stopped trusting social democratic parties, because structural issues that the United States have similarly been paralleled all over Europe, right? All over the Western world. We have seen that people across political divides, and particularly also younger demographics, have been mobilized specifically with environmentalism. But the very first thing that to note is, this is dangerous, right? Already there are massive outfalls of specifically global warming, right? Climate change already has massive problems. It is creating, like, people don't talk about the fact that the heat wave that we had for 2 or 3 months, 2 or 3 weeks continuously above 30 degrees Celsius in Europe has caused the deaths of 60 to 70,000 people. How do we calculate that? We basically checked how it deviated from the average from previous years, and because the heat exacerbated tons of health conditions, because it makes people collapse and die, these are numbers that are intangible and difficult to kind of grasp unless a politician brings them up and tells them to you. And guess what? At that point at which you're not incredibly ideologically binded, that is something powerful. At the point at which you hear that tens of thousands of people die that shouldn't die, that is something where you reach people uniquely, right? This is something that we need to be able to instrumentalize in the Democratic Party. At the point at which floodings happen in South Bend, Indiana, the way that Pete Buttigieg likes to bring up again, that reaches people, right? Specifically people that are beyond party. Specifically people that can empathize with the fact of their home being destroyed and being neglected and falling into disrepair, right? These are things that can uniquely appeal to people. Now, therefore, that is what we need to strengthen in the mid to long term. But yeah, second.
So Republicans know this, they just counteract your claims, they put more efforts into anti-environmentalism. Why is this a better climate than what we have?
Well, fairly simple. Because for the Republicans to remain relevant, they try desperately to keep a grip on aging demographics, and they of course don't want to let go of their new core blue collar workers that they've been working on for decades and decades. Specifically, is there right now still comparative leverage in swing states that they can only mobilize in this way, like by promising them things that they can't deliver, while at the same time promising them, whipping them up in specifically social issues. We think that this is a lost game at the point at which we start being able to mobilize people that aren't voting right now, people that don't feel like there's a pressing need, and people that don't really feel like they understand which side of the political divide they're on. Guess what? There are plenty of people that don't go voting. This is a big deal. Specifically not only young people, but also people that don't identify with the hyper-polarized divide that happens there. In swing states, when you are able to appeal to younger people on the basis of the powerful messages of the harm that environmentalism does, with the coordination of tapping into a great green movement that is now materialized as the biggest threat towards the more alt-right populist groundswell that we've seen around the place, that is the area where the Democrats can make the most gains. Why is that so? Specifically because of a few things. A, at the point at which they again go back to blue collar voters and go for coal, that's the point where they lose, first of all, a lot of their own people going to the election, right? Because guess what? Classical lefties don't want to vote for a Republican light. They don't want to vote for a Republican either, but the delta is for many of them to simply stay the fuck home, right? At the point at which you also have younger and younger demographics that now are given by the Democratic Party in our world something that is bigger than parties, something that is an existential threat in the mid to long term. That is something where you can bind people to your party at the point at which the Republicans aren't following suit and adapting their views to become more environmentally friendly. We think that this is a unique opportunity, and we think that what they are giving us are objective massive harms. It is based on the premise that you can get these voters back. They haven't proven that. We win.
For the remarks, we welcome the Deputy Prime Minister.
So it's a good point in this debate to state that oppositions cannot win this debate by waving around global warming is awful, it's terrible, and all of that. Why is that? Because they are never able to show to you why they are more able on the day of the House to actually have legislation, to actually have them dealing with the kind of global warming crises. And it is already on our framing for the very beginning of this debate when we say the Democratic Party is the only actor within the United States that it will be able to eventually deal with the climate crisis. We say that the only way to reach there is to get more votes, and it is currently in 2020, not a long process they talk about like young voters one day caring about global warming. Currently in 2020, it is extremely harmful for them. I'm going to do two main things. I'm going to deal with the question of where the Democratic Party is going to get more voters on three levels. Dealing with what we get from opening opposition. Secondly, dealing with why the current rhetoric is really weakening the Democratic Party. And lastly, why you actually gain more voters when you talk about the issues that Trump talks a lot about the employment. And currently, this is the time to gain those voters. And lastly, I'm going to talk a little bit about the kind of climate change and why we still win on the fact that we can change it. So let's go directly into the first one because it engages what we get from opening opposition. So what do they say is a few things that are problematic. They say, you already lost voters. You aren't going to get them back. If that is true, opposition doesn't have a case because no delta appears in this debate if you cannot reach voters back and get them that happening. So we say already here they are in a problem. And more than that, why is that you lost them? Because they know that their jobs are lost. Nobody is going to think that his job is definitely lost. People are optimistic. They look for methods. They look for people that are going to promise them, I'm going to keep your job. I'm going to get you your profession. If you're going to say that, people are going to vote for you. They are never going to lose on the profession to experience everything that you talked about before. So what are opening opposition relying for? Because what they tell you is the following. People really care about the kind of environmental issues. They try to compare to Europe, which is obviously not the right comparison because we do see a different kind of people talking there. So they say people care so much about the kind of climate change issues that they're going to actually vote for the Democratic Party talking to them. This is unlikely on multiple levels. Currently, people don't really feel the kind of effect that climate change have on them. Meaning that when they go to elect which they're going to vote for in the current elections, they don't consider the kind of climate issues. They don't have this impact on their life, but other issues, for example, employment issues, maybe losing your job is something that people consider when they go to vote. So even if they care about those issues, it is unlikely for them to go to vote upon those issues. So that more than that, we aren't going to lose people on the sense that the Democratic Party is not going to talk as much about this kind of environmental issues. Why is that? Because we still have a lot of scenarios when it is not mutually exclusive, when it can still somewhat push to environmental change, but also protect workers' rights and talk about the fact. Meaning that we can get, even if people somewhat care about the environment, the Democratic Party can still talk slightly on that. We said that in conditions when it is mutually exclusive, meaning if you're going to push for, let's say, alternative fuel, meaning people are going to lose their jobs immediately, it is something that is unbeneficial for you to do so. So let's understand why the current metric is problematic. Because as we said, they say, well, you're going to pushing for the Green New Deal, pushing for things like that is something that is beneficial. We say a few problems with that. We already see that this kind of rhetoric really makes for major backlash. Why is that? You lose the kind of support of tycoons. You lose the kind of support of a lot of corporations that care a lot about the current situation and do not want to lose a lot of creating changes and becoming more ecological. Meaning that they lose support of big powers when they push for the sort of campaigns. We said it more than that, just people don't really understand the climate issues, and when Trump keeps telling them, well, climate change is not a big deal, it's a lie, it's unlikely for them to start investigating and going into the issue, and it's very difficult for you to understand. Meaning pushing this kind of rhetoric is something that is ineffective for you, but more than that, we already said before, it is something that is not agreed upon within the Democratic Party, creating the kind of conflict within the party that is also not beneficial. So what's happening now in this push? We say that Trump is not the best. And now when people who have already voted for it, even conservative voters, have some criticism on them. They see the children in the immigration camps and they feel horrible that they voted for someone that separated children and mothers. It means that they aren't as content. But what do they still care about? They care about having a job, they care about the family. And Trump does a lot for that. Trump goes into a trade war with China in order to guarantee them the job because the Chinese are stealing their job. Trump goes into immigration, he does all those things in order to make sure that you have a job. It means that even if you aren't satisfied with Trump on a lot of levels, the fact that he can grant you employment is something that is most crucial in your life, and you're gonna go and vote to make sure you're gonna have this employment. And as long as Trump keeps doing that, it is impossible for the Democratic Party to say, well, we care about you, we want you to vote, but maybe your job is going to be lost, but you're okay. Vote for us still. We said this is very problematic when you do not engage with the level of something that people are fearful. And people are fearful. We're talking about 2019. millions of people are gonna lose their jobs soon because of automation. All the millions of truck drivers in the United States are gonna lose their job. This is an immense fear, and you're not gonna go to vote for someone that is not gonna promise you that you will still have your job. Meaning, when the Democratic Party doesn't engage those issues, promise, even on the expense of losing some of the benefits of automation, losing some of the benefits of creating new fields, they lose the elections and have no way to actually create changes. We say already that the Conservatives aren't likely to push for climate change. We say just on the fact that Trump already established a very strong rhetoric that climate change is a lie, and it's unlikely for any kind of Conservative Party member to go directly against something that is so crucial in the Trump campaign, which is very unlikely to happen. They are more likely to just say, well, he's right, he's a lie, we're gonna keep your jobs because this whole thing is a lie, and they won't do this kind of effort needed in order to create actual change. Which leads me to my second clash, but before that, opening.
Look, for your mechanism to work, the Democrats need to literally be stupid. They literally need to get up and not suggest any mechanisms for protecting jobs. That's not the comparative that we need to defend on our side of the house.
No, not at all. We say any kind of mechanism to ensure you have jobs that also include making sure there isn't environmental damage is simply something that doesn't happen, and people aren't able to understand that if you're gonna lose your job and you're gonna lose some benefits, you are the problem. And this is our side of this debate, understands that you need to keep your job even if it's an environmental benefit. So it's understandable you also win on the kind of climate change. So as I said in my initial framing, we just are able to understand why if Trump and the Conservative parties will be elected and will gain a lot of power, they will actually be able to create change. We say yes, in 2019, we still have time to change. If currently the Democratic Party is going to change the rhetoric, is going to go get those voters that don't want to see those children dying, children crying in those immigration camps, if they're going to get those votes in the next election and in the long term, they can actually push for more legislation within the Senate, within the House of Representatives, meaning they can actually create change. So we say currently, if you don't do so, you are unlikely to be able to do it on the long term on any level. We can still backtrack on climate change. We can still do big things in order to change it, but in order to do so, you need people who actually care about that in power. We are very proud to propose.
Thank you, Speaker, for the remarks. We welcome the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
Panel, we believe that even if the Democrats win under their world, they're going to end the world. This is the comparative that we're bringing to you today, because we're saying that the kind of damages that we're talking about that are being done on an environmentalism basis are so impactful that they are literally ending lives. This is the comparative they need to compete with. We are saying that it is absolutely possible for the Democrats to get up there, say we're going to fight for jobs, we're going to help you, re-educate you with new jobs, we're going to teach you coding, we're going to teach you this. We have no idea why the Democrats have to give up all the discussion on the jobs, and we have no idea why this is the framing that the Democrats would apply in order to run their campaign. Their case literally rests on the Democrats running a terrible campaign in order to win, where they only focus on environmentalism and give up every other mechanism and every other issue in America. Unless this is true, where we have no reason to believe that this is how the Democrats will run their campaign, their case doesn't stand up to that impact, because note that the moment that the Democrats accept that they are willing to protect the kind of jobs that have that kind of environmental impact, even if they win, they then have to abide by that in order to keep winning, because the midterms will come around after 2 years, then they will lose the House, they will lose the Senate, they will be powerless again, and under the metric of opening government, the Democrats being powerless is the kind of problem they wouldn't like, meaning that in order for the Democrats to maintain their status, maintain their power, they will need to abide by the promises they made during the 2020 campaign. We're saying that then, if they promise the kind of structural damage, then all of the Calyx damages, which opening government entirely concede, will accrue, will get worse, and we will have more people dying. We think that on our side that's more likely. Secondly, we think that the metric of electability is actually one that we're very willing to go with, because we're saying that voter turnout is really important in order to win elections. How do you drive voter turnout? This is something that Calyx very much talks to you about. He gives you two metrics on this. First of all, he tells you that you push the young into voting, a group that has been historically been very politically I forgot the word, but basically not as engaged as they should be, all those things. We're saying that mobilizing them, just like Barack Obama managed to mobilize the African American vote, is something that can swing a lot of the elections for the Democrats. We're also saying that this is an issue that is uniquely bipartisan. This is an issue that affects all Americans, regardless of their standing in society, regardless of their wealth, regardless of the color of their skin. This is something where the Democrats can actually capitalize and bring about a unified front that attracts all American on an equal playing field. We think this is something that is a uniquely powerful mechanism, therefore, in order to attract them, in order to attract voters. But additionally, we're saying that even if this isn't the issue that wins over all voters, we think there are other issues. Note, for example, that opening government gives us a fantastic example of what Democrats can run as well. When they tell us that that everyone looks at the Republicans and thinks, holy shit, we elected a government that puts people in concentration camps. We think this is a particularly powerful mechanism that the Democrats could utilize just as well as running on this. We don't think that the Democrats have to give up jobs, though. And this is the final crucial piece of engagement, right? Because this notion that unless we defend environmentally harmful jobs, we don't defend jobs is just uncomparative that we get from opening government. They might, at the best reading of them, is they would tell us that these jobs are the kinds of jobs that mobilize the important voters, that mobilize the voters in the swing states. Note that Calix engages with this already in his speech when he tells you that these voters specifically have been lost. What we are now trying to target are other voters in those swing states and trying to convince those, because not everyone in Michigan, not everyone in Ohio, and not everyone in Florida has a coal job, has an oil job, has a job in whaling, or has a job that's in some other fashion environmentally impactful. We're saying we can convince those people on other issues. They have to prove to you that it is uniquely this mechanism through which they ensure that we win those states, because note that their entire analysis rests on the Democrats winning through this mechanism. If they don't, and there's a good chance they won't, because we're saying that you're losing a lot of the traditionally left, those who really care, a lot of the left who really care about environmentalism, you will lose them on their side of the debate. And we're saying that by not mobilizing your own base, you are more likely to lose elections. We think that that specifically running as Republican light, where you basically run, what's her name, Camilla Harris, or Buttigieg, like those people. When you run those people, they're basically just Republicans in a Democrat's skin. We're saying that those kinds of people are the kinds of politicians that are uniquely unlikely to mobilize the Democratic base, who have been disillusioned by the politics of the Democratic Party, who have not been feeling like they stand for anything other than being opposed to Republicans. We're saying that we're in a unique position where we can give voters something to vote for again, hope. We can give them a future. We can promise them something unique on our side of the house, that once you just go into the debate that opening government wants, which is, no, Trump will not give you, Trump won't give you jobs, we will give you the same jobs. We think this is something that Trump can then actually uniquely utilize.
Question.
But before I continue, did you take closing?
Question.
I'll take closing.
Okay. Why are we going to solve this issue of climate change?
Why are we trying to solve the issue of climate change? We're trying to fix the issue of climate change because there are dead people on the ground. This is something that Calix has already told you. Now, I already also analyzed to you in my rebuttal why, if we give up on climate change, even if the Democrats win, if we give up on these most atrocious of impacts on climate change, these most atrocious jobs that are creating the most damage, this is when we cause the greatest amount of harm on the scale of environmental impact, right? We're saying that when we drill for shale, when we pressurize the earth, when we cause more earthquakes, when we further heat by burning coal, further increase the heating of the atmosphere, further reducing the ozone layer, the polar caps melt more. It's fairly intuitive that all these damages accrue significantly on our side of the house. I think the environmental impact is fairly squarely on our side of the house. So if that's the metric you want to go with, please be my guest, I suppose. But let's finally be really clear, because the final metric that opening government gives us is where did I write it down? Right, this idea that we have China will become more environmentally polluting if Trump wins, on the basis that they now have to engage with trade war. First of all, we think that China has other incentives to want to combat their environmentalism. They have realized that it is particularly harmful. They have realized that their population has disproportionately high amounts of lung cancer due to the amount of environmental pollution. They have all the other incentives in order to improve this. Second of all, we think that in terms of environmental capitalism, there's a lot of arguments to be made that why that is going to be particularly useful. We think it is therefore also likely that China is still going to do these policies even if Trump wins. We're super proud to oppose.
Thank the speaker for the remarks. To begin the debate for the lower houses, we welcome the extension speaker for the government.
Look, we're gonna come here with an unpopular opinion. We don't think this is a debate about solving the environment. We don't think any team on opening has showed why we have any capacity to have positive policy which can actually reverse or significantly change the way climate change is happening. We still agree with opening government that not having Republicans in power is simply a good mitigation as to not make it worse, so we're going to engage in two frames. First of all, we're going to resolve the clash on electability just to win an opening frame because it's fun. Then secondly, we're going to give you a principal claim as to why, given that we probably cannot reverse with positive policy or change anything significantly, it makes far more sense to focus on labor. Let's move on electability. Now, they like to talk about voters from elsewhere, but they never really analyze where the election is likely to be won, i.e. where Trump and the Republicans have gained traction or are now. Won the Rust Belt, specifically Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Note, they used to be swing states, now they're becoming explicitly Republican states. Why? Because Republicans started opting into explicitly left-wing rhetoric. We're going to stop externalizing and and outsourcing jobs to, I don't know, Southeast Asian countries. We're going to give you back your jobs, your industry, and your factories. People who used to vote blue for years because that was the delta for Democrats against Republicans are now disappointed and they feel abandoned. Therefore, they are turning to the Republicans. Note, these people are disappointed in Trump as well because Trump has not delivered on his promises. If we take a strong stance to return the employment to them, they're likely to revert to blue because they used to be blue voters. But for that, we need a strong stance. It's not enough to present just you did not say this. Look, it's not enough to present just any policy, because it's an issue of optics, right? This needs to be seen as a strong shift. We as the Democratic Party have realized that we have neglected you, therefore we are turning back to you. We cannot have this with just any policy. But secondly, Ohio and Florida, true, they are swing states, but who is swinging? Not the richer classes who believe in climate change anyway. Not the young people. Not the millennials. They vote Democrat anyway. The people who are swinging are people in rural parts of Ohio and Florida. People who have incurred regulation costs for farming and agriculture because of these kinds of policies. People who feel the state is not providing them with enough jobs to pay for their healthcare, to pay for their loans. People from the lower and middle classes. They feel abandoned, and that is the cause of the apathy. The rest are deadlocked states. Given we're the only team in the debate to show you the election battleground, we think we win over opening up. But let's expand this even more on the long term, right? If the mainstream Republican Party focuses to a significant extent on environmental change, what you get is more fringe candidates like Bernie Sanders, who realize the Republicans have started opting into labor rhetoric. Therefore, you create more far-left socialist alternatives, which are then discredited as being unelectable. Therefore, given the issue and image of socialists in America and the idea of the hate towards communism, you are in the long term, even if the Democrat Party is to present environmental friendly policies, they're also likely to be branded as socialists because the entire party is going to be branded based on these candidates. And the Green New Deal buys into this as well. It has also been marred by the idea of unprofitability, of something that cannot be done, of huge public spending, of an essentially socialist policy, right? So if we do what they have on their side, we essentially gain the idea that the party is unelectable. So we win in this clash because we show where the election battleground is, because we show the long-term change, and thirdly, because the OO has no method. But more importantly, can we really solve climate change? So as I said, we agree with opening government that not having Republicans in power is probably a good thing, and it's not going to make things worse. That's why we engage on the clash of electability. But we think in terms of focusing policy, we probably cannot significantly change, reverse, or mitigate the impact of climate change. For a number of reasons. First of all, even if we do get elected and we try to implement these policies, it's unlikely why these policies are not going to get discredited in the long term, perceived and criticized as being ineffective, as the Green New Deal currently is, and that therefore in the long term, Democrats are not going to switch back to the strategy of not proposing these policies. Secondly, at the point where you try to propose these policies, you essentially push a narrative, we're all going to die. This means you're likely to over-regulate. When you over-regulate, this incurs economic costs and gives the other side clear numbers to show that your investments, like windmills and solar panels, are not profitable in producing that energy. Therefore, you are clearly painted as a government who is spending the people's money on things you cannot change. Thirdly, we are unclear as to why this makes a global change, given that China still exists as the world's largest net polluter, given that other countries, apart from the European Union, which is not the entire world, are also likely to implement these policies. Fourthly, developing countries. Now, these countries are largely agricultural. Most of them have not gone through the industrial phase of development. We are talking about decades of heavy pollution of rivers, of deforestation, of fossil fuels being released into the environment. It is unclear why a shift in the United States of America, which is also probably not going to be turning it the greenest country ever, because you still have the private company lobby, you still have the industrial lobby, you still have an incentive to appease to the other side. So even in the USA, it's not a full shift. It's unclear why it changes anything. Fourthly, it's unclear why we get, fifthly, it's unclear why we get implementation on the ground, right? It's very hard to regulate top down and street level bureaucracies and stuff like that. It's very often going to be the case that local bureaucracies are not going to implement this because of the backlash of their voters, or they're just local entrepreneurships are going to try to avoid this and evade regulation inspection. But sixthly, and this is probably depressing, but I don't care, scientists are agnostic as to whether we are past the point of no return, right? We are hearing this argument 15 times a month, that we can no longer change anything. The ice caps are already melting. Florida is going to be underwater by 2050 anyway. We are unclear, and the scientific community itself is unclear as to why we have any long-term change. Then, even if we get elected, it makes less sense to prioritize this. Before that opening.
Yeah, look, we don't think that you engage fully with the metric of electability just in terms of the voter turnout argument we're bringing to when you compare the effect that you're actually engaging the electorate on a level that you
The people who believe Republican believe hard Republican. People who believe hard Democrat, including climate change, believe hard Democrat. I've painted to you what the swing states are and who is swinging. You should have listened to my speech. Look, this is principally more legitimate. One, because on the metric of the role of the government, as an institution which takes away people's taxes and liberties and has coercive mechanisms like the police and the army, which can use to force you to do its bidding at any time in life and you're helpless towards it, then the role of the government back to the people is to change when it can change the most, right? Where it can make the most impact on a daily level, given this is literally bringing people wages, bread, education, healthcare. That's probably clear. Secondly, lottery of birth. People are born into families where they have no access to healthcare and education and have no agency to choose this. The state is the only rectifying mechanism, right? The only and specially placed actor which can resolve this. No other exists, right? This means that the comparative is, if you have one sole actor who can put bread on the table and does not do that, we say that's illegitimate. But thirdly, we say both sides are comparative here, right? Because if the Democratic Party expects people to be environmentally friendly, note, this incurs larger costs for electricity, larger costs for gas. As a small entrepreneur or farmer, you following more regulation which costs more. If we expect that from you on both sides, then it's principally legitimate to first grant you a basic livelihood in order for you to be able to sustain that. But fourthly, we say we need more left-wing parties. The electability issue is not about solving climate change, but if we don't elect left-wing, nobody deals with welfare, nobody deals with education, because the right-wing buys into the idea of all of these being privatized. For all these reasons, we're unpopular, we're sad and depressed, because we always are, but we're right, as we also always are.
Thank the speaker for the remarks, and now we welcome the member speaker of the opposition.
I'm firstly going to let you guys in on a little secret. Jonas and I really didn't think we were going to make this far, and that meant we did something this morning we had never done before. We prepped. That is why I'm now able to tell you that the current unemployment rate in the United States is down to 3.7%, the lowest it's been in I don't know how many years. That means that in a massive voter thing base they're currently hinging their entire case upon is 3.7% that aren't relying in the state where it is the most necessary. It is factually untrue when it is that closing comes up and tells us that like Trump's approval ratings are down in the crucial states of the Rust Belt because he's actually up 7% when we're looking at Wisconsin. That is why he's still very popular. I think that's why you're not necessarily going to win them. I think second of all, Penn State hasn't changed. That's why they're not looking to other solutions. Bear in mind that we're literally fighting for the last 3.7%, willing to sacrifice the future of the rest of like the environmental world. I think that's a bad trade-off, and I'm going to explain why. First of all, just like engaging with two pieces of a tenuous rebuttal. I think when it is that people are currently quite happy in their employment situation, it isn't necessarily because Trump is exclusively credited. No, thank you. Obama came in at 10% of unemployment rate and cut it down. That's why people in general believe that the Democrats as well, following the tendencies that have been doing so now, specifically also in Wisconsin, don't believe that Democrats will take that away just because they focus on environment. The fact that they're now employed means that they're going to be able to care about other things, such as environment. I'm going to prove to you why that's important later. Second of all, on the principle that we're here, I think first of all, they hinge the entire case upon the idea that unemployment rates are the only ways in which people are allowed to get food on the table. I think that is wrong, following like the general tendencies of the Democratic Party, caring more about, food stamps and what do I know. I think there are better ways, if that's your principle, to fix it. Second of all, they rested upon the case that we're absolutely beyond the point of no return when it comes to, environmental cases. Because if you want to really focus on one where it is that people in general have more food to eat, I think we should care more about the fact that the Maldives are drowning. The fact that people, I don't know how many places in the world, are unable to get their harvest through because the environment, because you cannot count no longer where it is that the monsoon is coming in. If the principle is that we should care about where it is that people feel the most harm, I think we take that principle. Two pieces of very good extension. First of all, let's talk about the internal issues, why it is that this is going to harm like the Democratic Party as a whole. I think the biggest problem with OO, though I think they're very good, should come second, definitely, is the fact that we're hurting our image. I think right now it is probably highly unlikely that Trump is going to lose. He has an approval rating that is about 45%, and we haven't seen for the past 75 years a president that has had above 40% of an approval rating actually ending up losing election. Second of all, I just think in general that they need to prove to us why it is that like the Democratic could win. Why is it that this is important? I think when you begin to specifically shift your policy away from the environment, you lose your status as the singular liberal party left. That means that people who care about this would have to turn to the Green Party. I think the biggest harm that Hillary faced was that she was seen as someone who just turned on the platter. I'm with gay marriage when other people's are. No thank you, against it when other people's are. I think this is what we're now fixing with the Democratic Party. We're saying that we're staying with the issue that we consider crucially important, the environment, because we know it's screwing up our country. It's screwing up our kids. If I leave this now in this election, merely for the 3.7%, which they need to explain to us would be more likely to vote Democrats exclusively for this, would give up the opportunity to claim this as our principle later, because now we're just seen as someone who turned on a platter, people who can't necessarily be like turned. I think this is important. Second of all, they need to tell us, they explain to us that this is incredibly socialist. I want to ask you how you think an unemployment like plan coming out from like a primary that has Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders is going to look. If you're afraid of the Democratic Party ending up looking socialist, that's what it's going to be. Because currently, unless they provide us something differently. I think the second problem in terms of internal structure, no thank you, is that this is probably going to be like the DNC saying, you know what, we should primarily focus upon unemployment rates. I don't think that Sanders is going to be agreeing with this. I think he's going to call out the DNC on focusing upon the wrong things. He's going to slash his other candidates for not giving a shit about the things that he considers the most important, the environment, and we're going to see an internal split where it is that you no longer just have to focus upon beating your Republican candidate, but more importantly, also have to face your Democratic one about why it is that you don't care about the issues that you promised you were going to. Recognize now that people from the Democratic parties that are running in primary deeply care about the environment. Seeming and just swift in a way to follow the pulse of the people as 3.7% isn't going to change. Second of all, voters. Yes.
Focusing on employment doesn't just mean reducing the unemployment rate. It means training for employment programs, affirmative action for discriminated groups, welfare and education reform for people to access skills.
Yes.
You cannot diss that as unneeded.
No, I think, first of all, the Democratic Party already does this in general. I think they focus, I think they already do that in a great term. I think the change that we're seeing is we are now saying, no, forget about the environment. The most important thing here is the unemployment rate. I think it is a weighing of the shift of the people. I'm not saying they're no longer doing that at all. I don't think we have to stand for that. They have to stand for why it is that the Democratic Party Party is going to explain to the voters that the environment is now less important than the unemployment rate. That's what you're arguing for. Let's talk about voters. We think OOG does a very good job of telling us that people, like the youth voters, don't turn out as much as they could. We say, yes, they're right, we could probably improve youth turnout, but already we also say the youth turnout in the United States is actually kind of good. Is actually kind of like good right now, though we agree that it could be improved. Why is this important in this debate? In general, we see it to then to see a youth that cares significantly more about the environment. Why is this important? I think when it is that we're going to have the apathy within the Democratic Party, the fact that we see that people are turning away from the environment, that's when you also begin to push away the youth. No, thank you. I think this is first of all important because the youth were the ones who most tended to end up voting, Green Party or Libertarian when they got pissed off at Hillary Clinton. I think that this is specifically because youth care about the environment, and second of all, had no connection in general to other political parties. This is important because if you don't want to stray away the youth, we're going to end up doing so. Second of all, we hear this idea. No, thank you. I took opening. I think that closing. I think that better. Second of all, we talked a little bit about why we have this sort of apathy. The thing is, if we try to win over the unemployment rate, we're never actually going to get to those people. Why is that? I think they tell us very well that we can't compete when it comes to Trump, when it comes to China, because Trump is going to be willing to go far further. I think the people worrying about employment are those who are worried that other people are going to come, foreigners are going to take in their jobs. Insofar that every single Democratic, that in the recent Democratic Party debate, people were literally for decriminalization, illegal immigration into the United States. You're not going to win over the people who care the most. That means you're literally just going to lose the voters who are currently greatly invested within the environment, probably also the huge campaign funds of rich philanthropists who really give a shit about this, essentially not gaining anything. At the end of the day, they keep on asking us, why does we're actually going to be able to change something? I think, first of all, we don't have to prove that we're entirely fixing the world, but I think it is definitely true in general that if we begin to do more about the environment, we're going to see less hurricanes streaming in over Texas. They're absolutely right. We're probably not going to be able to go completely fixing everything, but we can at least make it better for the generations that are coming. I think at the end of the day, we're going to be better able to push bipartisan deals through with things such as environment, because mostly Republicans aren't as just stupid Americans as they argue, than unemployment, which is going to be deeply socialist following the agreement of Elizabeth Warren.
Thank the speaker for the remarks. To conclude for side government, we welcome the government web speaker.
Closing opposition spends literally 10 seconds rebutting our case in this debate. That's why I'm going to spend much more time rebutting their case in this debate and show why they're not comparative and stuff like this. But recognize that the context of this debate has been unclear to some extent until we give you the concept. This is literally not about fracking and stuff like this. This is about gas tax. This is about emission tax, trucking tax, diesel taxes, all of this which harms the precariat and the middle tax, and which people have rebelled against in France and stuff like this. This is what drives jobs out of the United States today, and it harms the creation of new jobs and stuff like this. Closing opposition's response to our case is but unemployment rate is low in the United States. Sure, it currently is the case, and it's probably going to go up because all of the teams here want Democrats in power, so necessarily we're going to screw US on economy because Republicans are not going to be there. But secondly, unemployment rate is not the same as employment issues in this debate, right? This means that wages are still low, you still have productivity that's growing faster than the average wage rate, you still have costs of taxes that are harming middle income families and poor families and stuff like this. You still have hour contracts and stuff like this. You don't have the minimum wage that's applicable to the rest of the Americans and stuff like this of minimum $15 and stuff like this. You don't have necessarily a good working pension system. You don't have a healthcare. These are all employment issues because they are to some extent tied to employment. If your employer gives you employment benefits in terms of getting healthcare and stuff like this is why we are still comparative, even if the unemployment rate is 0 in the United States, because there are still employment issues, right? People are not living their best life just because they have an awful job in the United States in the current stuff like this. Second point of extension they have is this classic idea of youth of the party. And they say, but youth cares more about the environment. We say it's comparative. Youth care more about social issues because you always have this characterization of millennials being historically screwed and stuff like this. this. We're unsure why a typical millennial is going to care more about the environment than he cares about like having bread on the table and not paying tuition costs and stuff like this. This is something simply incomparative. But where it gets comparative, and this is the same argument that's been going on for like 20 or 30 years. Democrats are winning because they cater to the youth and stuff like this, and then still Republicans win, and we have Trump elected and stuff like this. The crucial part in here is minority. And we're going to talk, like, Tina already explained this a lot, but we also ask a POI. There's an important problem here. You can only prioritize environmental issues if you have the capacity to do so, which means that your basic like levels of like living and stuff like this are to some extent like already met. This is why when you take their example at their best, and this is the European Union, where does this happen? It happens in the Netherlands, it happens in Denmark, it happens in Germany. It doesn't happen in Slovakia, it doesn't happen in the Czech Republic, it doesn't happen in Croatia. Because people there don't care about the environment because they are poor, right? So it's symmetric to some extent as how many voters do they lose and stuff like this. But there's literally no response to our idea that we're not sure, we're agnostic if we can solve climate change and stuff like this. Status quo, most of the policies they tried in the European Union, which is the most liberal on climate change, does the most stuff, are inefficient. They backfire. Literally, they put a bunch of money in windmills and solar panels, and this is going to save our like dependency on fossil fuels, and then it turned out that it creates much more pollution in the status quo because they've been using like weird methods of extracting it in China and like pure materials and stuff like this. So it's unclear whether this is going to work, but also it's a global problem. We're unsure if we're past the point of no return and things place, but also if the United States does its best and it becomes the world leading like expert in climate change and does all of the stuff, it's unlikely first of all that the rest of the world is going to follow because of what they had with Trump and like destroying all of what the rest of the world agreed upon to this point and stuff like this. But then also gives you 5 or 6 reasons, I'm not sure, like why this is something that we're not sure if we're going to solve and stuff like this. So, but we also say that even if the status quo, if you believe this is solved, it gets much worse on this house because Republicans kind of like counter for this narrative, and it gets much more worse than you can predict in the status quo because there's going to be a lot more obstructionism from the Republicans in terms of like tying with the big business interests and stuff like this. This is why our POI was important, and it like never got a response from them. A little bit later. What's the context of this? Opening opposition claims that Democrats are going to tap into big oil business workers. These have been Republican since the ages, right? So this debate is not about them and drilling in Alaska. This is about like your average worker in a swing state, as Steve characterizes correctly, and why he wins the electability clash and stuff like this. Opening government then claims that Democrats are going to lose big business and corporations to Republicans. But this is status quo, guys, right? All of the big business and corporations already support Republicans because in either side of this house, whether Democrats are going to be employment or Democrats are going to be environmentalists, it's going to screw corporations and big businesses to some extent because Republicans are for those and like Democrats, no matter what they choose, and stuff like this. This is why it's not comparative in this way, but it's comparative on the ground, right? So by funding from them, it gets better on our side of the house. This is groups on the ground field. You have people who are employment issues like workers, unions and stuff like this, and you have people who are environmentalist issues and stuff like this. So why is this comparative in terms of raising money and motivating people and stuff like this, directly responding to opening opposition and stuff like this? Because worker unions and stuff like this are more likely to donate and campaign and volunteer in the context of the party hierarchy. Why is this? Because environmentalists, as they claim in this debate, are solving the world, right? Which means it's never enough that you are solving the world to some extent. You need to solve the world in totally. Which means as the point to which they don't care or they don't like the policy or they don't like some candidates, they're not going to be like, whipped into turning to the polls if they don't think this candidate is environmental enough. And the extent to this is that it can never be environmental enough because we are saving the world, and all of it, what we are doing right now, is not reversing the issue and stuff like this. This is why you're unlikely to get voter turnout, as they claim is the biggest impact in this debate on their side of the house, because we are unlikely to show why a Democrat who's unsatisfied with what the party is going to set in his district, and this might be the real, if the party can get elected compared to animal like liberal California, where they're going to like ban everything and stuff like this, is actually going to lead to voter turnout. Yes?
Given that opening government doesn't want to give up environmentalism, Trump will still capitalize it on it anyways. On our side, we can actually make this a driving point for mobilizing our base anyways.
Look, but this is symmetric, right? We're still going to have some environmental policy on our side of the house comparatively more than the Republicans have. Like, it's not like they're going to disappear and stuff like this. But the idea of voter turnout is symmetric to the extent that you claim is not symmetric. Because people who are privileged in the status quo are the ones who are going to be like voter turnout by this and stuff like this. Comparatively, that means that there's no trade-off versus Republicans on your side of the house. That means that in swing states, you actually don't care, you're not going to win on this, you're not going to, like, this is not going to benefit you and stuff like this. This is why we say that in swing states, it's crucial that you whip people who were previously Democrat, who have a traditional voting democratically and stuff like this, but now we're taking because of Republicans, because we didn't think about the employment issues and stuff like this. But we also engage with this long-term analysis that kind of comes from closing opposition and stuff like this. In the long term, if you don't focus on the employment issues, even under their framing, which is like the unemployment rate is necessarily going to go up, that means that at that point where you're going to have this issue, you are going to have much more worse policies on the Democrats, much less electable people going and running for office, because this is going to be the internal party backlash against prioritizing the issues that the party cares about the most or the voter base cares about the most. That's why we're proud to propose.
Thank the speaker for the remarks, and to conclude for the opposition and the whole of the debate, we welcome the opposition with speaker.
This debate probably comes down to two things. First of all, what is best for the Democratic Party? Secondly, what is best for the environment? Firstly, we think that when it comes to the Democratic Party, we think that this is a calculus of what voter group they should bet on. Whether they should bet on the ones that care something about the environment, or whether they should bet about people that care about jobs. We think that we give you extensive analysis as to why they should bet on the progressives, and I'll go through that and how that played out in the debate in my classes. Firstly, talking about electability, as others like to call it, I wrote it down as winning the election. All right. Firstly, talking about the workers' action. Opening government, that's you, sorry. Opening government comes up and says, jobs are good because they're easy to understand for people, and Americans care about having jobs. Yes, that is true. Opening opposition says, look, that doesn't mean that we have to say that we don't want jobs for people and that we will cut down on jobs. We don't have to take that cost. We think that the only policies that they have to defend are the ones that promote further jobs by giving further subsidies to that extent. Then opening opposition talks about how these voter groups are already lost. No, thank you. We think that there's an interesting clash here when government comes up and talks about how Trump is fighting extremely hard for these people by taking the China war, taking some really hard policy choices that the Democratic Party are probably unlikely to take. We think that the fact that Trump is willing to do things that are probably stupid for America in the long term, or probably stupid in a lot of ways, but in order to fight for his primary voter group, we think that it seems silly to fight for that voter group that he is willing to fight so hard for. Why not fight for the group that the Democrats have already had the support of in previous elections and probably have to the extent that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren exist? Secondly, we also think that the ones that we're talking about that are lost are probably hard to get back because a lot of them also vote for Trump for a number of other value reasons. They probably also vote for Trump because they're a little scared of Mexicans. They probably also vote for Trump because they like that he's anti-establishment and all those kinds of things. We think that it's unlikely that that's going to, we don't think that I'm sure, I guess both sides can say that we would also be anti-establishment if that was going to win the election, but that's not the comparative, right? So we don't think that we change that on government side, and therefore we don't think that it's likely that we're going to win them back. Lastly, Clara also talks about how there is a relatively small group. The fact that unemployment has fallen, not because you can only appeal to the unemployed people, but nonetheless, the fact that unemployment has fallen so drastically means that it is a lesser issue in America comparatively. Right, let's then talk about what we care about, the progressives. OO talks about how they want to mobilize a green movement and how the green movement is probably primarily youths. We say that specifically when it comes to the Democratic Party, they have been able to appeal to a progressive group of people. That is to say that they have been able to appeal to a group that identifies progressive and want to solve issues that are deemed as progressive, I guess you could say. That is to say that they want to solve things like LGBT rights. They want to make sure that we fight for the environment and all those things. They like that because that fits their identity, and they like to vote for the Democrats because they fought for that. We think that those are the voters that primarily vote for Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. We think that the specific mechanism that is dangerous here, and Clara also talks about this, is that at the point at which it's likely that Biden is going to win the primaries, we think that we are likely to see the issue that we saw the last time. That is to say that Hillary lost a large portion of the voters that were supporting Sanders but couldn't support Hillary because she gave up on so many of those values. We think that the environment is an easy cause that they can take to maintain that identity, to be progressives while still being Biden, which is a centralist establishment kind of dude. But we think that he can maintain that progressive nature if he fights for the environment at the same time. No, thank you. Then we'll talk a bit about some loose stuff. Firstly, about funding. Opening government says that environmentalism is unpopular with business. We got some rebuttal from CG. Thank you. Yes, that is the status quo. Democratic Party gets less funding. But also we think that to the extent that they already get less funding, we think that they can appeal to that in a certain kind of funding. That is to say, a PR funding. That is, the CSR is becoming increasingly popular and companies want to say that they're fighting for good things. They can appeal to that kind of funding and then give that image back to the companies. Lastly, closing government says that electability is about swing states. We to some extent agree, but we also want to point out that the election of Trump, I don't remember what year, the election of Trump was also to a large extent lost because they pushed away a bunch of voters to the point where they became apathetic and didn't vote or voted for smaller parties or independent candidates. We think that that was the main problem and not necessarily the fact that there are states that now that then turned Republican, and we think that maybe that was also probably the reason for a lot of those states turning Republicans. Even furthermore, we think that all states have a youth, and that is the growing demographic, a youth that cares about the environment and cares about the fact that they or their children are going to experience heavy impacts of this. We think that that is the narrative that is growing. Probably it came to Europe first because we were more affluent, but it is a sentiment that is growing even amongst the less affluent. Secondly, Clara gives you an extension about the Democratic Party. I'll take you in a second, closing. No, actually opening, I'll take you in a second. Clara gives you an extension about the Democratic Party. That is to say that we have an impact that works specifically even if they don't win. Clara gives some reason as to why Trump won't win, but we think that nonetheless, we think that it's important that the Democratic Party revives that image of being progressive so that they don't push away the voters that cost them the last election, even though they promised a response. We heard none from closing government. Go ahead.
The fact that I'm employed doesn't mean I'm not afraid of unemployment more than a vague idea of climate change without advertisement through fringe candidates that tackle each other constantly.
Look, that characterization seems quite off, right? It doesn't mean, like, the Democratic Party doesn't have zero commercials and in a world that is dominated by Republican propaganda. We don't think that that characterization stands. I'll just move on and hope that you also bought some of my previous characterization. Let's finally talk about the environment. Closing government wants to say that it's too late, and therefore we shouldn't care, and therefore our obligation is to do change where we can do it the most. Scientists agree that yes, we are probably a little agnostic, we're past the point of no return. But they also agree that symptoms can be dampened to a large extent. They all agree that we need to be doing stuff in order to make sure that we don't just all immediately die in 50 years, right? We think that that means that on their principle, there is an immense benefit to not causing active harm to the environment. Secondly, harming it accelerates things. So that is to say that if we harm the environment, the harms that we will see are maybe going to be in 20 years rather than in 50 years. Probably, the governments have a bigger obligation to their current generation than a future one. We think that because we show why the Democratic Party is likely to have a bigger chance when appealing to their old voter base of progressives, and also just because it was a fun round, thank you all very much.